Nora, thank you so much for being on Can't Shovel Hurricanes and willing to make the ride up from South Miami into the studio. We're going to touch on a lot of things today. It's going to get a little bit intense on the education front, but I really want to hear your perspective and passion about what it's like to teach in South Miami. And the reason it was so important to have you on specifically is because I have been focused geographically for the most part around my space of the world. So I've had the head of school of Donna Klein. I've had Stacy and Adele from Zale, which is also in the same complex in Boca. But the truth is most people that think about the transition into South Florida, they're not thinking Boca. Boca was a place you came to retire. We just fell upon it because of the school. But they're thinking Miami. They're thinking Aventura. They're thinking Hollywood. They're thinking all the things that we know about South Florida. So you run a school, which you'll tell us all about, and has a philosophy that I really want to know a lot about. But before we specifically get into that, you're a transplant into South Florida. How long have you been here and why are you down here?
So I've been a transplant a few times in my life. When I was 5, my parents moved to Peru from Europe. When I was 18, I went to New York. I came to New York. I still think that I'm in New York. I went to New York to go to college and I stayed, and New York has been my home forever. I've been in education for 39 years or so.
Wow.
And after 17 years of being a head of school, I decided that was enough. I had given enough to the Jewish people, and I wanted to do other things. I was doing coaching. I was doing mentoring. I'd been dabbling in a number of things. So I was retiring. I was done. And a friend of mine or a colleague of mine was retiring from Temple Beth Am in Pinecrest. I never heard of Temple Beth Am. I never heard of Pinecrest. I'd never been south of South Beach in Miami. And I've been to Miami maybe 3 times.
So to put it into context, Pinecrest is in South Miami.
Pinecrest is in South Miami. It's south of South Beach. It's south of Brickell.
Okay.
It's south.
Okay.
And she called me. She told me she was retiring, and she thought that I should take her job. And I said, not in a million years. I don't know anything about Florida. I don't want to move to Florida. My family, my friends, my community, my shul, my everything is in New York, and there's no way.
Where in New York?
I was in Westchester and New York City.
Right. Usually, my first guess would have been Long Island, which seems to be the longest island in the world.
Yes.
Everyone I meet is from Long Island, so yeah. Okay.
Long Island was not for me. I landed in New York City. Many years later, I moved to Westchester when I remarried, and then we went back to the city once all the kids left the house. So it took about 3 or 4 months in 2019. So it was before the pandemic. Her calling me, a bunch of people, and finally I said, let me just take a look. And I came down and I fell in love with the school. I loved what they stood for. It's a complex. It's a synagogue and a school. And now we just opened up the Hub, which is a performing arts center.
Wow.
So it's really a Jewish center in South Florida, which there isn't that much of in terms of that kind of structure. So in December 2019, I visited, and I signed a contract. 3 one-year contracts.
3 one-year contracts.
Yes, I was ready to go back. I was like, I don't know what the heck I'm doing down here. And in the middle of the pandemic, it was the beginning actually of the pandemic. It was July of 2020. My husband and I packed our apartment. We got permission from the kids who live in New York. I've never left them. There was no reason for me to leave them. They're my, this is who
And you have 5 boys.
We have 5 boys. One live, but they live in San Francisco, in Denver, and 3 live in New York. And they said, go, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can just go and come back. And that's what I thought I was doing. I was going and coming back. And I didn't. I came back. I came down here. I love the work that I do. I love the community where I'm working. The school is a reform school attached to a reform synagogue of 1,600 families.
Wow.
The families, many of the parents I have are alum, and they love the school, and they're committed to the school. And they wanted what I wanted, which was to really take the education to a New York standard, as I call it.
To a New York standard.
Yeah, really.
Interesting. Can you elaborate what that means?
We're an independent school. very much accredited by the Florida Council of Independent Schools, and we follow, all of those standards. But I also believe that there are industry standards that we need to follow, industry standards for math and for reading and for writing. And that's what I love. I'm an educator. If you ask my kids, I'm like an education nerd. I read, I research, that's what I love to do. So I wanted to raise the standards. I wanted our children to be prepared for what is going to be. I've seen my children. They've gone to, 2 of them went to Jewish day schools, 3 of them went to public schools. And their jobs today are nothing they ever were prepared for in school.
Is that what you're trying to change within?
I'm trying to, we've already changed it. I mean, coming the pandemic, what I heard from a lot of people is, you poor thing, you just came here, you don't know anybody, you don't know anything, everything was new to me, everything. The only condition I had was that I had to live in a building. I didn't want a house because I'd lived in a house for too many years, and that wasn't going to happen. And the only condition my husband had was we had to have water views. He said, we're going to live in Miami, we have to have water views. And we do live in the 28th floor with water views.
You sound like almost everyone who I talk to says the same thing, the water view. But I actually want to know from a personal level, how did you manage that? A new role, new place, middle of pandemic, like the stress level must have been astronomical.
Yes and no. Going through it was hard. I had an extraordinary board and a COVID task force, which everybody had to put together, that was super smart. And they supported all my crazy decisions.
Like what?
Like, for example, I opened up the school for children in October of 2020, but I closed it for parents. Parents could not come in.
Were the kids wearing masks?
The kids were wearing masks,
Okay.
Everybody. We had very strict guidelines. It was like, who's this New Yorker? Like, who's this crazy woman?
You clearly brought the New York down here. I was trying to run away from that.
I wanted safety first, and I felt like that was my responsibility. And I had COVID in March of 2020 before anybody knew the word COVID.
Right.
So I was not taking any risks. And because I was brand new, and because people were scared, even though in Florida there was no COVID in Florida, we were driving down, and we were driving down at really difficult times. We started seeing less masks. We started seeing more, places open, and we had no idea what was going on. We didn't leave our apartment for like 3 weeks.
Did you shut down classes if there was a COVID case, or make kids or parents quarantine?
We didn't. We did shut down classes. We would have everybody tested. I wouldn't allow any teacher who was not vaccinated. I mean, I went the New York route. That's all I knew.
I disagree with you. I wholeheartedly.
A lot of people
And
did.
in hindsight, would you have taken the same approach if you had to do it all over again? Obviously, we all have our opinions, and they're nothing. I'm not a medical practitioner, neither are you, and this is not going to be a COVID conversation. But I could tell you that many of the driving forces towards moving down here was how COVID was handled within the private school system in Canada.
Yeah. It's very hard to say would have handled it differently, because in reality, my medical guidance was coming from the head of infectious disease at Mount Sinai in Miami. I had a pediatrician who was a infectious disease pediatrician. So that was my medical guidance. I wasn't making the decisions in that case. But
I respect what you just said so much more than people will ever understand, because you're talking about people that are specific to the infectious diseases route and can add value to it, versus the people that were running the train in Toronto, for example. Just because you're a medical practitioner, doesn't make you a specialist in that space. And they were the one leading the charge in many ways, and the science has changed. But okay, I understand that. I'm not here to have a COVID conversation about it, but I definitely love hearing the perspective, because I think that we will encounter something like this again in our lifetime. I personally think that this was just dress rehearsal for something else, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any stretch of the imagination. I'm worried for sure that we might not be prepared, because now they know how people will react. I think this thing was almost weaponized, but again, let's go back.
Let's move on.
Absolutely.
To,
how many kids are in your school?
We have about 560 students from 18 months to 5th grade.
Okay. How much growth have you seen over the last 2 years?
About 100 students. Wow. Our early childhood especially, I think I have 5 spots left in the entire early childhood, and it grew from 18 classes to 21. We are in a brand new
18 classes to 21.
Next year we're going from 4 kindergarten classes to 5. The school is growing.
Do you have room for more capacity?
In the elementary school a little bit, but not in the early childhood.
Do you find that it's a lot more competitive now to get into the schools, and schools have become a lot more selective than it was in the past?
Yes. And what had happened is that we had, or the school at the time, had lost a little bit of focus on what was the vision and the mission of the school.
What is that?
So we are a Reform temple with a Reform day school. That means that we are a Jewish day school. We're a Jewish independent school. There's going to be Jewish in the school. There is Hebrew in the school. There is a very Zionistic school. We have a rabbi who believes in Israel, supports Israel very openly. And the people that we are accepting into the school now buy into that philosophy. And not only that, but they come in 18 months when they have babies. And it used to be between pre-kindergarten to kindergarten, they would leave. They would go to other private schools, or now we are really looking at people who want to stay all the way through and really have that kind of education. And have an education that doesn't mean that you're having 3 hours of homework when you're in 4th grade. There's a massive culture of tutoring down here.
Can you explain that, please?
I don't understand it, but everybody needs to have a tutor. I have 4-year-olds who are being tutored, and I'm thinking, for what? That's what I mean. I bring a little bit of New York down here. 4-year-olds need to be playing, and that's how they learn. They learn through play. They learn how to communicate. They learn how to compromise. They learn how to work in teams. It's not an individual thing. I'm going to, get the best score in the whatever test you give, and that's going to make, that's a correlation to success. It's how do you relate to other people? How do you relate to a team of work? How do you sometimes leadership? Sometimes you take the second in command. Sometimes you follow. And teaching those skills is just as important. So our academic program is very strong, and we have made some serious changes, and it's moving. Our teachers are working really, really hard. But I also look at the social emotional. Like, who are these children? Who are these children who are struggling, and why are they struggling? And who are the children who are succeeding, but so easily that when they face a challenge, they kind of like take a step back, and then comes the tutors. Why isn't my kid reading at 4? I'm like, who cares? Right? Like, your child will be reading. I promise you will be reading. But is your child a child who can relate, who has empathy, who can care? That I really care about a great deal. That's my guidance background. So people need to understand that. In my previous school, there was a family who came in, and they wanted me to guarantee them that their child was going to be able to go to an Ivy League. The child was 4. And I said, I can't guarantee you that I'm going to be here in a year. Like, life is like, how can I guarantee? There are schools who will tell me that my child will go to an Ivy League.
Is that right?
I have no idea. I would never work in a school like that.
That's a absurd claim to make at the best of time. And I'm smiling while you're explaining this, because in a formal school setting, I was the kid who was the troublemaker, the class clown, the one that couldn't sit still. Unless I was engaged and participated, I came from a different world. But to hear that schools are moving in that direction, the way you're explaining it, where you're actually catering to the child, and you're not hyper-focused on the education piece, which doesn't seem like you're putting on the back burner by any stretch. You're bringing it to a higher standard, but you're trying to empathize with the child who might not be great at something at that point, but then they are great at something else, and they get that through play, which is something my wife emphasizes all the time as well.
Play is so important. And I remember many years ago, there was an article in the New York Times that said blocks came back into kindergarten. I remember thinking, when did they leave? Like, that's why I left the public school. I started in the public school world. I'm a product of Jewish education from 5 through college. And personally. And my children, my 2 biological children are, day school graduates and camps and the whole 9 yards. But I wanted something different, so I went to the public school. I also believe in the public school system. I believe that people have a right to a good education.
You mean as an educator?
As an educator.
Okay.
So that's how I started my career. And I left when it became all about the testing. And they stopped looking at children as human beings. It was like, what's the test score? We have to put this child on remediation. We have to, give, and there was...
What's remediation?
Remediation is when you try in every possible way that is not always child-centered to raise the score. It doesn't mean that the child is going to know how to do the skill.
So purely grade-driven.
Grade-driven.
Right.
So anyway, every time I meet with parents, I say my focus and my goal, which they laugh, but it's not funny, is no one is going to have a tutor when they come to Rambam Day School. There's no reason for tutoring. If you're paying a lot of money for an education, we have a responsibility to give your children what you need.
Is it all right if I ask what tuition is?
Tuition is about $19,000 for elementary school.
Okay. And that's per kid? And then it goes all the way up to high school?
No, we end in 5th grade.
Oh, okay. And what happens then? Do you have like a feeder that you guys like to...
So there are 3 main private schools that children go to down in our area, and then public school.
The massive growth that you've had now, does that mean that you're waitlisted in some classrooms?
That's how the 5th kindergarten class came in. We didn't want to waitlist children, so we added a class.
Right, so you expanded.
We expanded, but we can't do that throughout the whole elementary school. So
what are you going to do with these 5 classrooms?
Classes go a little bit larger. Instead of being 15, 16, they'll go into 17.
So you're going to make sure that there is a spot and there's a seat for everybody that's coming through?
Yes.
Where are you finding the overwhelming majority of people are coming from into your school? Because there is this like wave of people that are coming down here. And what I have found is I thought it was COVID that was the driver because I know that was mainly for Canadians. Turns out it's the education system in other states that people are trying to move from.
So for us, the movement is coming from California, New York, a few from, Chicago and other areas, but lots of New Yorkers.
Yeah.
I find myself having conversations with people who still won't give up their New York license plate. I didn't want to give it up either, but I was getting tickets. So I decided that I didn't need to fund the state by my stubbornness. Or who will still hold 917 numbers because that was the area code. That right? Like I could go to a 305. I don't want to go to a 305. I'm a 917 person. Right. Or who'll still have, a Met or a Yankee hat, or who will go to a basketball game and
cheer for the other ones.
Kind of like say,
I'm one of those guys when it comes to hockey.
Yeah. So lots of New Yorkers, lots of people from California, who also, California had a really hard COVID time, and they really came for COVID. And now the growth has slowed down. We're seeing a slowdown in growth, and we are... And we're seeing the people who are coming to school are people, like the new families, the ones that are going to come next year or the following year, are people who are either have been here or are natives, Miamians who went to college, worked in some big city for a few years,
and they're coming back. Oh, wow. Okay, see, I actually never thought about that perspective. And I think that has to do a lot with the geography. And I think Miami specifically, is way different than where we're sitting right now in Boca, which is more like suburbia, and Miami's a little more dense. I don't know enough about the geography there to be totally honest with you, but the schools that I talk to, the heads of schools, the people that I'm talking to on the education front are all saying the same thing. We are full. We are at capacity. We had to create more space, which means all of these kids are going to get an education, build communities, and likely stay.
Correct.
And that's what kind of you hope for, I think, as a parent, right? I think that within the United States, there's just so many more options. So people are transient. You have kids in 3 different states, right? 5 kids in 3 different states. I'm really hoping that my kids will want to stay here. And the way I'm going to do that is to build community for them and hopefully their kids, God willing, in time. But the shift of people that have come down here, they've brought different psychologies. They've brought different perspective on life. Where do you think the education system is going to go, and where is it headed?
So I can tell you from my perspective and the families who have come, especially from the Northeast, they are used to elite schools.
What is an elite school?
A school that has really high standards, produces children who are very educated and very well-rounded. And again, this is nothing against it's not a political conversation, but I watch what's happening in the public schools and what can be done and what cannot be done and what can be said and cannot be said. And it scares me what's happening in Florida.
Okay.
So remaining an independent school, which is what we are, what's going to happen is people who want that independence, people who want that.
Can you clarify what an independent school is?
Sure.
I mean, does that mean, like, I want to hear your interpretation of it, because I have something in my head that I think, and just to clarify, in Toronto, private schools have to still abide by the government curriculum, but they're allowed to layer in the Jewish day school, the Yiddishkeit part, the Hebrew part. But otherwise, they're sticking to the blueprint that's allowed for them. So I really want to hear what that means, because I don't think a lot of people, especially from cross borders, don't understand that.
So an independent school is a school where a curriculum could be what you make it be. The standards are what you want it to be. The priorities, the values are what the board basically dictates. That is a typical independent school. In reality, what has happened over the last 10, 15 years is that independent schools want to have also the accreditation and the high standards so that people will believe that you are still producing, the high-level thinkers and the high-level producers, and children are going to be contributing to society. So there are independent school associations all over. NAIS is the National Association of Independent Schools. We are accredited by the Florida Council of Independent Schools. They do a thorough. We're going to go into accreditation again next year, reaccreditation. And they're looking at everything. They're looking at the finances. They're looking at the curriculum. They're looking at admissions. They're looking at future and strategic planning and everything that we want to do. And you want to have that kind of level of scrutiny, because otherwise it could be a very nice home care place.
Yeah, everybody would you need to create some sort of standardization. Otherwise, everyone will run amok and do what they want.
So what's happening in Florida right now is that it's a voucher state.
What does that mean?
It means that the state will give money to people to attend a private school.
So the state is incentivizing.
Correct.
Are they giving it to the individuals, or are they giving it to the schools?
So up until this past year, it was basically either need-based or it was educational based. So if you had a child who has special needs or any kind of special needs, it didn't have to be, incredibly deep.
And is the application directly through the school, or is that to the state?
So the application to the school, and the families would apply to the state, and the school would get the money, or the state or the families would get the money, and they would turn it over to the school. We don't accept vouchers in my school because I don't want anybody to tell me at any point that what it is that we have to teach or not teach. So we have made a conscious decision as an institution to be an independent school that right now it's only paperwork. But I don't know what the future is. And I'm very lucky. I am in a community that fundraises and a community that believes in the schools, so we're not suffering. But for me, independence is really important.
It's hard to sometimes, I think, relay in a podcast. You're probably doing a very good job off it, but like when I'm talking to you, your passion and your drive is evident. And you're trying to change something. Like you're trying. It looks like you've got a direction and you're going towards it, and it seems to obviously be working for you. Where does that come from?
Wow, I've never been asked that question. I think that there is a combination of things. First of all, I love what I do. I started in 1984. I keep on telling the parents, you guys probably were not even alive. Your parents were probably not even married when I started working. And I always wanted to be an educator. That was my passion. I always knew that that's where I wanted to be. Loved math. My math teachers and my physics teachers were horrified at the thought that I wasn't going into business, that I wasn't going into whatever, it was the 80s. Women could do anything. It was really first generation that women can do absolutely anything. My dad is also a rabbi, so I saw him dedicate so much and so passionate about the work that he was doing. My mom was a community engager. Right? Like she raised money for this hospital, for that hospital, for whatever. So I always saw my parents being very, very passionate about what they did. And for me, they're my role models. I mean, that's what I aspire. One day I aspire to like somebody to speak about my dad or my mom the way, or about me, about the way they speak about them. So that is where my drive comes from. I think that passion is really important to do what you do. You cannot do this work. It's really hard work. It's lonely. That's why, us heads of schools, we have our, group of people that will call each other and say, can you believe this happened to me? And they understand.
So you support one another?
We do. We have networks. I have a national network of people that I can just pick up the phone and call. And when I've had difficult times, I've called them, and they've taught me so much. I've learned so much from my colleagues, and if you're not passionate about what you're doing, then it shows. And in education, it's really hard. It's really hard,
especially when you don't have the blueprint of like a standardization, like you would in a Canadian private school. You do have an audit, and you have a protocol that you have to abide by. But for the most part, you can put your mark on the education. And I don't want to just harp on the education because that's not something that you've touched on. It's the approach to the individual. And it seems to me like that's more important than the grades, is what you're telling me. I know those are important, but you're focusing on the individual. What is it that you're doing now that wasn't done before?
First of all, updating curriculum. And that sounds very jargony and educationally, but really making it about the children, right? Like, everybody complains American children can't write. Well, that's because we're having them write all kinds of weird stuff. Have them write about what they care about, and you'll see writing.
Brilliant.
Boys are hard. There's study after study after study after study how we are failing boys in schools.
I really need you to elaborate that.
Okay.
Because it's something that hits home.
Yeah.
Personally.
And I'm a mom of boys, so I saw it. So there's always been, whether it's true or not today, the expectation of behavior. What is behavior, right? Like, and how many girls go under the radar because they behave really well, but they don't, until you don't start seeing real issues, they're great. They're perfect little girls. Boys, whether culturally, because of the messages we sent them, whatever it is, we call them rambunctious. We call them all kinds of things. They don't know how to sit still, or such a good boy. Why is that? What's a really good boy? A boy that will come in, follow, directions, sit, do what he's supposed to be doing. And whether or not that is their nature, that is what we call a good boy. I mean, how many boys call themselves bad? I'm a bad boy.
I was a bad boy.
Yeah, you call yourself that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, who touched you, right? Like, I was not a great student until I got to grad school.
Me too. I was not a great student, period. Let me clarify that.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that I did very well. My grades were great. And, all my mom heard when she went to parent-teacher conferences, I hated parent-teacher conferences. I hated them. She would come back and say, so teachers say if you only paid attention, you would be blah, 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 blah.
Oh, my God, that statement is something. So my grades were good, but
I hated it. Hated it. It's like...
If you only applied yourself.
And I was really a good student. I was in all the advanced classes for biology and physics and chemistry and math. I was like doing really well, but I really was not, that was not my thing. Like I liked having fun. And then college was not also, it was like I did well, but it was not like my thing. When I got to grad school and I started learning about the things that I was interested in, I flew high.
What did you study?
So my first master's was in guidance and counseling.
First master's. Okay.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd. So my first master's was in guidance and counseling, and I became a guidance counselor in the public schools. So I had 700-800 kids under my care. I did all kinds of wild stuff in New York, in the Bronx.
Okay.
I did all kinds of wild stuff, like, go with kids to their homes because we didn't know if there was going to be an adult there. All kinds of like weird, wild stuff that I would not recommend anybody does. But I was in my 20s. I love what I was doing. Then my second master's, I went to Bank Street and I got a master's in supervision and curriculum. So it was like it was an administrative, and again, loved it. Did really well. I was with a cohort of about 13 or 14 people. Many of them have left education. I'm like still there. I'm still like plugging away. And we learned about progressive education while the same side had standards. So I'm a progressive educator with very high standards.
It's an interesting approach.
It's very different. Very different. And then I did a certificate at Harvard for also leadership. And then I did a certificate at Columbia. At Teachers College.
You're a perpetual student?
Not anymore.
Okay.
At some point, somebody said to me, you should just go for a PhD. And I'm like, the idea of going to school for a PhD was like horrifying. I was like, no, I want to learn what I want to learn. I don't want to learn what other people want me to learn.
But it actually seems that all the stuff that you've done has rounded you into what you're doing today. So you applied it. A PhD is more research-based, whereby you were doing these things because you have a mission. And it's very evident from this conversation that the stuff that you experienced in the past, being in the public school sector, plus here, and the way you were a student, is what you're applying to the education realm today. What do you think the approach that you're taking today will be the outcome for the kids in the future? So you've got little kids, 18 months up to grade 5. What do you think the new, call it maybe generation of students, is going to look like versus the one that came behind them that didn't have this sort of platform, didn't have this sort of educational style?
This is a complicated question, and I'll tell you why. Because education is not just what's happening in schools. It's also it's what's happening at homes. So partnerships between home and school, and everybody talks about school-home partnerships and how important they are. They're real, right? If you're seeing something in a child, however you're seeing it, and you don't have somebody on the other side to talk about, it's damaging to the child.
Can you give me an example of what that would look like? An ideal or one that you can talk to?
So I can talk to you about 2 extreme examples.
Sure.
And by the way, it's usually with boys, which kills me.
Why do you think that is?
Because boys exhibit frustration differently. Right, like they act it out more than girls will, and I'm making massive generalizations here. Massive. I mean, probably people would say like, "What the hell is she talking about?" But so if I have a child who's acting it out or not living to potential, and you have a conversation with a parent and you say, "We're seeing the following," and the parent says to you, "Well, I don't see that. Child is fine. You don't, whatever you're seeing here, it's not happening."
Is it denial?
It is denial, and it's also, I think, shame. I think there's a lot of shame in parenting at times, where if your child is not what you think your child could be, then you have to fix it.
My wife has a thing about it that no child needs to be fixed. They need to be nurtured.
That's right.
Nobody's broken.
That's right.
You just have to figure out what makes them tick.
However, if you don't have that partnership, and the other extreme is an example of a child who you bring the parents in and you say, "We're seeing this," and they'll say to you, "We see some of those at home also," and then you say, "But you're not seeing some of it because it's a one-on-one." Right, at home, sometimes it's like much easier to give attention when you have 14, 15 kids in a class. It's harder. and the parent will like evolve with you and like start seeing those things and they get the support that they need, all of a sudden that partnership flourishes. So for the children where there is partnership and where you can have those conversations, what I am hopeful that we're graduating year in and year out are children who, number one, have a good sense of self, who they are, have independence. And these are 10 and 11-year-olds, not talking about like 15, 20-year-olds, have a sense of independence, and they can advocate for themselves. I like children who come to me and argue back. Like I want them arguing. That's why my favorite age group is middle school. Everybody knows that. And it's the one thing I miss sometimes on not having a middle school is like that. Argue back. Tell me what you think. And we're going to talk about it and we're going to discuss it. And we're going to get to the point in which we'll either agree or to disagree, or we're going to have to follow the rules of the school because what can you do?
So you are advocating publicly for having a 10 or 11-year-old confront and debate an adult and a figure of authority. You want them to actually push back on you?
Absolutely.
That's so different from the world I grew up in.
Respectfully.
Yeah, I didn't mean at all in any way. I just mean that I took it as face value. I arguably also train my kids or teach my kids, to have respect for authority, but definitely stand up for what they believe in. And hopefully those beliefs are on solid footing and within them, right?
And what you want to do is train the adults not to say the chutzpah this kid has of asking me why we're doing this.
Right.
But to actually explain it.
Ironically, I think the parent training piece is by far and away the most important part. Because once those kids leave the doors, they're in their parents' hands. And if they're not carrying the torch of what you're trying to implement, and then you hope that the parents that are coming into the school and bringing their kids are in the same mindset. Or Donna Klein uses the word mission appropriate. As long as they're in the same mindset, then you can carry the torch. Otherwise, all the work that you're doing and all the work the parents are doing are being undermined by one another. So it's really important when you're selecting a school to tour, interview, understand the ideology, because it's not the same cookie cutter approach as it is for sure in Canada. Each school has its own mission. Each school has its own ideology, and each school has a leader like yourself that is implementing their methodology within the kids. That is a very foreign concept to many people.
And by the way, dig deep. Everyone is going to tell you that they're a child-centered school. Everybody can use the jargon. Anybody can tell you that, we are graduating menches. That's what we want to do.
How do you dig deep? What are the questions you need to ask?
How? Give me examples. Let me see. Come a couple of times to the school. Don't visit once. During the pandemic was really hard because we wanted people to come and visit and they couldn't. But now when people can come in, come visit, ask questions, ask to speak to other parents. They're always going to give you the parents who are very happy.
Sure.
But if you have the conversation and you're honest about what is it that it's important to the family, what's important to you as a parent? Is it important that no parent is going to come on in and say, I don't care if my child learns how to read, write, do arithmetic, and really be proficient and all those things. That's ridiculous. But what kind of values do you want? How are they being taught? We are adopting now a new social emotional learning program because I realized that we didn't have something that was really values-based. And it comes out of Yale, and I've known this program for many years. And they're going to train our teachers of how to teach children to recognize emotions, understand them, and then they can actually manage them. I feel for these kids. They're exposed to so much. Internet, phones, everything. They lived through a pandemic where the anxiety of the adults is contagious. You cannot avoid it. If you're anxious, your child is going to be anxious. This not, it's impossible not to be. They sometimes saw grandparents getting sick. Oh, you're sneezing twice? You can't go to, Nana's house. Got to wear a mask. You got to, wash your hands. All of this, it's all good habits. Washing your hands is good habits after you leave the bathroom.
The difference is when you're like militant about it, when
That's
you
right.
become anxious about it.
Exactly. So this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a high level of anxiety among children. We're seeing children who are stressed. Forget about the school part, about life in general. And we need partners in parents who can say, I'm seeing that also. And we had a parent who has a fifth grader who was still wearing a mask up until a month ago. And she said, enough is enough.
Who said that?
The mother. She said, we said, we'll respect whatever his wishes are, your wishes are. And the mom is like, enough is enough. This is not because of health issues. This has now become like a terrible anxiety-provoking issue for him. No mask. And we had to rip it off. And it was, but there were conversations. There was conversations with the parents. There was conversation with the child. There was conversation about logic and statistics. Sometimes we don't teach or treat children as if they're people who can understand. We like, okay, because I said so. And believe me, as a mom, there were times in which I said, because I said so. But if you have a conversation, a 5-year-old can understand certain things. A 4-year-old, a 3-year-old. You need to have the patience to have the conversation, right?
Yeah.
You can't just, and with a 3-year-old, you go into the why, and you go like, okay, enough already. Enough.
Once you go into that rabbit hole, I've got about 4 whys in me before I'm like, you know what? Enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's appropriate.
There are so many things that you just touched upon in the last couple of minutes that I'd love to dig deep into all of that, but I'm very aware of not making it a COVID conversation, because it's not a COVID thing. It's the anxiety piece. It's the PTSD that's left both on parents that are willing to uproot their entire lives, their everything, because of how this was handled, because of the impact on their kids. And that's a conversation I had both with my mom and my wife had with her parents before we left. We said, what do you think about our moving to Florida? And they didn't even say anything about COVID. They said, do whatever it is that you have to do for your kids. And we believe that we are making the right decisions for them. But I want to go back to something that you mentioned about boys. And when I say I was a bad boy, it's because I couldn't sit still. I had trouble concentrating. My son is the contrary of me, and he's a great boy. And what I mean by great boy is I was a good boy too. I wasn't a school boy. For me, the savior was athletics. And it's where I channeled the overwhelming majority of my energy, and I still do today. I mean, something like going to the gym is therapeutic for me more than it is me sculpting my body. I'm married with 3 kids. I'm never going to do better than my wife. Nobody's looking at me. Athletics was really important to me. How important is the athletics piece within your school? And how do you guys incorporate that into the education? And it's not just applicable to boys. I can only speak to the segment of what I can relate to better.
So there are, first of all, they're little, right?
Right. And I'm not talking about varsity sports.
That's
but,
right. So physical education happens every single day.
Every day.
Every day.
Cool.
Recess happens every single day for all of the kids, right? We have trained our teachers that if they see that the kids are fidgety, stop the lesson. Go outside.
Amazing.
Go to the playground. I mean, we live in Florida. The weather is fine. Go out there. Don't hold back. We are starting to train our teachers to do some kinesthetics before they start class. Do push-ups against the wall. It resets your entire brain.
So cool.
Yeah. Why not?
I would have benefited from that. Like, I'm putting myself as a kid version of me. And if I did that in class, I'd probably get thrown out or get a laugh from, like, it was so out of the norm. And it would probably have gone such a long way.
We have high tables for the 4th and 5th graders and low tables. There are kids who can't sit. So put them in the high tables so they can get up and they can fidget around.
That is just amazing.
I mean, how often do you sit for a long period of time? I can tell you that in my job, I have one of those desks that goes up and down.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever put it down. I'm up because I'm like standing, I'm moving. I don't sit for an hour and a half attending to something. Hands-on activities are so incredibly important. What are they doing? When I go observe a class, which I don't do as much because it's really not my job, it's my director's jobs, I ask them, what are the kids doing? Don't tell me what the teacher is doing. If the teacher is lecturing, I'm done. I'm bored to tears. If the children are trying, are experimenting, having conversations, quiet classrooms are. When I was a math teacher up until I came to Florida, I taught math even as a head of school. I always had the honors algebra class. The noisiest class you could walk into. I would give them something, go figure it out. And I'm going to teach you the algorithm, but go figure it out. You guys are smart. So changing a little bit the way we teach, allowing children to be frustrated. It's okay if they work in a pair and they get frustrated and they push each other. That's an amazing learning opportunity. They're going to learn how to solve for X squared. And they're going to do it. And then they're going to get a graphic calculator that's going to do it all for them. So teach them how to dialogue. Teach them how to present their voices. Our writing program is very much about your voice, right? Because they have to write a 5-paragraph essay. We have to, right? But when I write, I'm writing to an audience that wants to hear about what's happening in the school. I'm writing to a casual something. I'm not, some kids are prolific writers and they will create, and we have many of those, and they're going to be the future authors and the future writers, however medium they use. But there's some for whom you give them a white piece of paper and it's like, I have no idea what to do with that. Right. That was me. I could never write. That's why I love math.
Me too. Numbers make sense to me. Even from the business world, I can tell a story by the numbers, and because they are consistent versus written word, which was a big challenge for me. And it was more of an emotional thing, and I didn't do well with translating that into writing. Are you finding that the approaches that you're taking now are making for happier, livelier students, and is it translating into grades?
I don't think I have enough evidence yet. It's only been at the school for 3 years, but I can tell you, this is when I was in the public school, I'm talking about 22 years ago, I asked my superintendent to allow me to do a new math program where there was no drill and kill.
What does that mean?
Drill and kill means that you sit there and you do problems 27 through 45, even numbers. Do you remember those homeworks?
Drill and kill, okay.
Drill and kill.
Yes.
You drill. And I said to him, can you let me experiment? I just want to experiment with something. It was the seventh grade. Those scores did not count for the state. That's when I started leaving public school. So he's like, whatever, do whatever you want as long as the scores, and we did not do any drill and kill. The scores shut up. It was all problem solving. It was all thinking. I'm talking about like before this became kind of popular. And I started getting flowers from the real estate agents, and I didn't understand why.
The school
because they published the scores.
Right.
And I remember thinking, like, I don't know these people. I had been in that school for a year and a half. The problem is that people are afraid to take those risks.
Why?
Because how do you measure? What is the one thing that states will or cities will, like, the state scores on blah, blah, blah went up 5%, or the scores in reading during pandemic went down, or that's what is, nobody's talking about the children. Nobody's talking about the thinking. Nobody's talking about, look at this amazing project. Yeah, we have like the scholars who will go and do whatever those competitions are, but your run-of-the-mill kid, no one's talking about what they care about.
The grading system that they have for schools here, is it only applicable to public schools? Like A graded, B graded?
No, we also grade in my school because they have to go from 5th to 6th grade, and middle schools want to see grades.
Okay. Do you find that sometimes, well, given your philosophy, I think it's pretty evident to say that it's not an accurate measure of the student as a whole.
No. So what we did was we added skills and knowledge. So, for example, in math, if they get a B, God forbid, they will have they mastered the problem solving skills? Can they do inferences? Can they estimate? Can they blah, 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 blah? So then you get to see what are the areas in which that child really excels, even though the grade might be a B. The reality is that when you're in 3rd and 4th grade, it's painful to grade somebody. It's like you're putting a value on a child and saying, and many of them live to that value.
Would you fail a kid?
I'll tell you where I would fail a kid. I have.
So you have, and your school has a
As
policy.
a teacher,
I mean, how about the school, Rambam? Are you guys, if somebody needs to be held back or failed, will you do it?
This is what we would do. I will tell the teachers to be honest about what the child has done. Tell me all the evidence of everything that they have done to support that child, all the evidence of the conversations they had with the parents about supporting that child. And sometimes you need a glass of ice cold water on your face that shows in that grade.
Right.
It sounds contradictory, right?
No, it doesn't. Not to me,
Okay.
because I have a sober point of view on a lot of this stuff, and I have to make a point that I'm not, talking contrary to the Toronto school system, which is what I know. I think that the teachers and the educators in the private school system is doing such an amazing job in so many ways. We didn't even get into security because it's something I want to discuss with you in detail. I just mean the difference here is that you have choice, and you can run the school in the way that you seem fit. And if people don't resonate and don't agree with it, it's the power of the pen. Like, they're stroking the check. If they don't like it, they don't show up. And you have to do the right things. Sometimes they're difficult. So I don't think it's contrary to failing a kid. I think you're not really helping them. But as long as you're mapping out a process on which they can improve towards the future, it's like, to me, like in sports, you get cut or you don't make the team or something. It's the same. It's the equivalent. There was a reason for that. And you stick with it and you work through it, and you either get the outcome that you want, but it's the work ethic that's going to carry them, not the result.
100%.
Right? I know already that I'm going to have you on the podcast again, because the enthusiasm and the perspective that you have, I can, in such a short order, I'm never going to really get to the bottom of it. And there's so much more I want to ask you. But for people that are looking to move into Miami, looking for a school like yours, how would they get a hold of you?
You go into the website. My email is very easy. Anderson@tbam.
Okay. And the school's name?
Is Rambam Day School at Temple Betham.
Is that the website?
Yes, but if you go to tbam.org,
okay,
that is, you'll see the temple, the religious school, the day school, the youth programs. You'll see the whole.
And what's your phone number?
At work?
Yeah. Well, no, don't give your personal number.
I have no idea.
Really? Okay.
No
Everybody,
idea.
just Google it.
Google it.
I'm gonna make it a point to book you now. And you've come so far, and you made this trek to come and visit us and talk to me. And I really wish that this was in a live studio audience, because then they can understand your perspective, your passion, your drive, and I can see why the school has grown. So, Nora, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been such a pleasure.
You are an amazing guest.
Thank you.
Have a good day.